Pro wrestling has a long and storied history, dating back as far as the Civil War era that even President Abraham Lincoln dabbled in an earlier version of professional wrestling. With longevity like that, pro wrestling has had many landmark moments in its history, which is why for the next 52 weeks, we are going to highlight the biggest events in pro wrestling history. Pardon the wrestling, but I am Bryan, and it's time for This Week in Pro Wrestling History. Are you tired of hearing how important NXT is on this channel? Well, get used to it. Well, you can technically say July 13th wasn't the debut of Charlotte Flair. WWE recognizes it as the debuts of her, Sasha Banks, and Becky Lynch, arguably three of the most important women's wrestlers in the modern era. When all is said and done, those three accomplishments may be viewed as the three greatest in women's wrestling history. At the time, Nikki Bella was the Divas champion, and though she was on pace to break AJ Lee's record, and Paige had also not too recently debuted as well, the Divas revolution was still out there in the future. Women were continuing to get notoriety through Total Divas, but they were still trying to be treated on an equal level as the men. NXT's Charlotte, Sasha, and Becky were going to truly kickstart women on the main roster. Their debut segment included a brawl with Team Bella featuring the Bella Twins and Alicia Fox. Their segment saw them put all three members of Team Bella in their submission holds. It put three young upstarts from NXT on a level playing field with the main roster mainstays at the time. It was obvious that these three in particular were great hands in the ring, but no one would have been able to predict the significant impact they would have had since then. Charlotte and Becky are among the most decorated females in WWE history, and Sasha, now wrestling under the name of Mercedes Moné in AEW, is racking up titles at an unbelievable rate, and is arguably the best bell-to-bell wrestler of the three. But let me know in the comments below which three of these women are the best overall. Many moments in Stone Cold Steve Austin's career will forever go down as some of wrestling's greatest moments of all time. But knowing who his partners that he won tag team championships with may be a good party trick to pull on your wrestling friends. The first man was the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. And due to a mutual hatred of the Hart family, the two teamed up and beat the champions, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, for the titles. When Shawn was suspended in real life, this led to the on-screen vacating of the belts on the July 14th, 1997 edition of Monday Night Raw. That same night, Austin got to fight for the titles again with a partner of his choosing. He opted to fight for the belts on his own until the debuting Dude Love came to the rescue. Austin would beat Owen and Bulldog once again for the belts with Mrs. Foley's baby boy and become a two-time WWF Tag Team Champion. Nothing like a good odd couple pairing leading into the heart of the Attitude Era. Unfortunately, this reign would end shortly after at SummerSlam that year, as in a match against Owen Hart for the Intercontinental Championship, Austin would suffer a severe neck injury due to the now infamous Tombstone Piledriver we have seen countless times delivered by Owen Hart. Hell is frozen over is a phrase that can be quite hyperbolic at times, yet it happens constantly in pro wrestling. Most recently, CM Punk returning to WWE would likely fit the bill. Hell, he even had a t-shirt that said it. But back in 2002, a very few possibilities of hell freezing over could have happened for WWE. And on the July 15, 2002 episode of Monday Night Raw, we saw Vince McMahon's biggest perceived enemy not named Ted Turner appear on Raw, Eric Bischoff. Bischoff, the longtime antagonizer of both WWE and Vince McMahon, was a legitimate shock to see on WWE television at this point in time. Just a little over a year ago, Bischoff was still in talks of trying to purchase WCW himself and continue to compete with WWE. WWE in 2002 is splitting up the brands of both Raw and SmackDown, with Vince being the owner of SmackDown and Ric Flair being the owner of Raw. However, both brands were looking to fill general manager roles. In a backstage segment, Booker T was being interviewed by Jonathan Coachman until he suddenly stopped talking. Eric Bischoff would randomly appear on screen, shocking the audience and everyone at home watching. Moments later, Vince announces Eric Bischoff as the new general manager of Raw. I loved the genuine shock and surprise of a huge name appearing for the first time in a backstage segment. However, I certainly can understand that potentially being a waste of a huge debut. So let me know in the comments how you think Eric Bischoff should have debuted in WWE. This is one of wrestling's darkest days, and like the previous Bash at the Beach incident in 2000 we discussed, this also has a full-length episode dedicated to it on Dark Side of the Ring. Bruiser Brody is one of the most legendary wrestlers of all time, being often cited as one of the forefathers of hardcore wrestling. The former student of legendary wrestling promoter Fritz von Erich, Brody would go on to influence pro wrestling legends like Mick Foley, Brody Lee, and even Terry Funk. I won't be able to do this story justice, so I implore you to watch the Dark Side of the Ring episode on the matter. But the Cliff Notes version of it is this. Bruiser Brody was wrestling in Puerto Rico for Carlos Colon's promotion. While there, Brody was asked by wrestler Jose Gonzalez, wrestling then as Invader 1, to talk in the locker room. Now, as the story goes, they were talking in the shower area when an argument can be overheard elsewhere in the locker room. Fellow wrestler Tony Atlas was the first on the scene as he found Brody bleeding from his stomach and bent over. Atlas also said he saw Gonzalez holding a knife with blood on it. Now, logistics including the crowd size as well as traffic to the stadium, paramedics would not reach Brody until well over an hour after he was stabbed. Brody would later succumb to his injuries at the hospital, and later on, Gonzalez would go on to be acquitted at the trial. Court summons for witnesses, most notably Tony Atlas and Dutch Mantell, who was also at the event, would end up not arriving until after the trial. This in essence exonerated Gonzalez, as no one was there to put forth their eyewitness testimony in favor of the prosecution. This was truly one of the darkest days in wrestling history. Anyone that is a longtime viewer of this channel is well aware that the 2011 Money in the Bank pay-per-view from Rosemont, Illinois at the Allstate Arena was the very first WWE show I ever attended. Up to this point in my life, I'd probably been to about 6 or 7 wrestling shows, but they all happened to be Ring of Honor shows. Absolute classics those were, but little did I know what I was about to witness at my first WWE event. I mean, you know this story ad nauseum at this point. CM Punk's pipe bomb set off reverberations throughout the wrestling world, and he was gaining popularity at an exponential rate. And at this point in time, Punk's contract with WWE was coming up. Now, Punk will often cite that the day of the Money in the Bank pay-per-view is when he officially re-signed. And I'm not going to dispute that fact, nor am I going to support it, but the story of the pending match between John Cena and CM Punk was Vince McMahon promised John Cena that if Cena could successfully defend his championship against CM Punk, who was threatening to leave the company with the championship, Cena would be fired. What fans in Rosemont would witness, as well as those watching around the world, is one of the loudest reactions heard in WWE in a long time, preceding one of the best matches in WWE history. And that's not hyperbole. On Cage Match, only 4 matches in WWE history are rated higher. Shenanigans aside, at the end of the match, this was top to bottom one of the best matches you'll ever see against 2 perfectly matched opponents. And of course, I'm biased, but an absolutely electric crowd that boosted the main event to legendary status. Before we get to Chicago in 2011, we look at the year prior, in which WWE for the first time would give Money in the Bank its own pay-per-view. I think now is as good of a time as any to give a cheap plug to my complete history of Money in the Bank, which is something you can watch by clicking the link in the upper right hand corner. Up to this point, Money in the Bank was an attraction match annually at WrestleMania. The idea was deemed so popular that WWE opted to give its own show and has been an annual mainstay since then. However, we are still a ways away from WWE heavily investing in their women's division, so the 2 Money in the Bank matches were separated by brands for the men's world titles at the time. However, for this, I want to specifically highlight just one thing from this event that featured some pretty significant moments. Now, a couple weeks back, we discussed Kane and his first ever WWF Championship win during his first blood match with Stone Cold Steve Austin at the 1998 King of the Ring, and how he lost the belt right back to Austin the following night on Raw. Kane would go on to win the Money in the Bank for the World Heavyweight Championship contract at the inaugural Money in the Bank event.
But wait! There's more!
Kane would also become the first contract holder to cash in the contract the same night he won it.
But wait! There's more!
Kane would also hold the contract for the shortest time in history at approximately 49 minutes, a feat which still stands to this day.
But wait, there's more.
Kane would then go on to win the World Heavyweight Championship by cashing in on Rey Mysterio after Jack Swagger beat down Rey in a losing effort after their match. And spoiler alert, Kane would get to keep this championship just a little bit longer than his first reign. For the first time in this series, we get to discuss Paul Heyman's Extreme Championship Wrestling, ECW. And this is not necessarily an event with a whole lot of notoriety, if any, but it does hold some significance. This was at a time where WWF was actually working with another promotion. You may be familiar with Jerry the King Lawler's interactions with Taz and ECW at the time. The program at the time saw Rob Van Dam, Sabu, and Taz's own manager Bill Alfonso all turning heel against Taz after the Barely Legal event in 1997. This led to a steel cage match to take place on July 19, 1997 at the Heatwave event emanating from the world-famous ECW Arena. That match would feature King teaming up with RVD and Sabu to take on Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, and eventually ECW's own color commentator, Rick Rude. And I gotta be honest, when doing my research for this event, this was the first time I had heard Rick Rude had been a part of ECW. Back to the match at hand, Rick Rude ended up turning on his ECW cohorts and joined up with King, RVD, and Sabu's side, in which eventually got this match to a no contest. This holds significance because this would be the very last time that Rick Rude would ever wrestle. Rude would find his way back to the WWF, being included in the original iteration of Degeneration X after leaving ECW, but he would eventually leave WWF once again after the Montreal Screwjob. He would head back to WCW after and infamously appeared on both an episode of Nitro and Raw on the same night due to Raw being taped. And he would also be the first wrestler to be a part of DX and the NWO. Like his time in WWF, he didn't wrestle for WCW and unfortunately would die of heart failure mere weeks after leaving WCW. Rick Rude was a mainstay on national TV throughout the late 80s and throughout the Attitude Era, and unfortunately his career and life were cut short. But to this day, he's still remembered as one of the most flamboyant personalities to ever grace the wrestling ring. This week in pro wrestling history featured quite a few landmark moments. But what was your favorite? Leave it down in the comment section below. And if you want to see an expansion of one of these events, let us know in the comments as well. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, as that is the easiest way for more wrestling fans like you to find this video. And of course, consider subscribing to the channel for more content just like this. Pardon the wrestling, but I'm Bryan. Thank you for watching.